East Africa is facing its worst locust swarms in 70 years, with Kenya particularly hard hit. And now it has spread to countries outside Africa. What's the best way to prevent and control the invasion of locusts? Before we get down to a discussion with real experts in the know, take a look at this first.
Invading legions of locusts are affecting dozens of countries in Africa and Asia. Massive swarms have been destroying farmland and threatening millions of lives. Even troops and planes have been mobilized in the Horn of Africa to fight the most serious plague in decades.
For the infested areas, definitely Kenya, Ethiopia, Somalia, but also Eritrea. Then countries at risk in Eastern Africa, Sudan, South Sudan, and also Uganda. Sudan and Egypt are also infested. So we are looking at a whole region of locusts because of these conditions, which are very suitable for locust breeding.
Efforts to control the locust infestation have so far not been effective. Aerial spraying of pesticides is the most effective way to control the swarms, but countries in the region do not have the resources. The UN body last week called on the international community to provide nearly $76 million to fund the spraying of the affected areas with insecticide. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the worst-case scenario could be the locust population would swell 500-fold by June. Asian countries have been gearing up to battle the locust invasion after it spread to Pakistan this month. Chinese farm experts say it's extremely unlikely that desert locusts will directly migrate to China's inland areas, but if the overseas desert locust plague persists, the probability of locusts entering China this summer will sharply rise.
For more on the locust plague in Rome, we have Keith Cressman, a senior locust expert at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Welcome, sir. In Washington, D.C., we're joined by Wu Changhua, the Chief Executive Officer of the Beijing Innovation Center. Welcome as well. Let me go to you first, Cressman, about the latest locust plague. What exactly is the situation now? I have a number here to share with our audience. A swarm, just 1 kilometer square of locusts, could eat as much food as 35,000 people in a day. That is a huge amount. Mr. Cressman, what is the latest situation?
Well, the latest situation at the moment, it's most serious in the Horn of Africa, as you've mentioned, in 3 main countries, in Ethiopia, Somalia, and in Kenya. Now, in all 3 countries, swarms have been forming, developing, and maturing, and now those swarms are laying eggs in the countries. So far, in Kenya, they've started to hatch into the wingless nymphs, what we call hopper bands, and you can imagine them as kind of moving carpets of locusts across the desert floor. Somalia, much the same, is occurring at the same time, and in Ethiopia, the hatching is just about ready to commence. Now, what's important about the timing of the breeding is that it takes about 6 weeks for those new hatchlings to become adults. So that means roughly about the end of March, they will become new adults and they will form new immature swarms. Now, at that point in time, it's the beginning of the seasonal rains, what we call the long rains in Eastern Africa, in those 3 countries. And so this is a time when the farmers generally plant their crops. And so this means there will be a significant risk at the time of planting of the next season. This is very, very critical. But in addition to those 3 countries, of course, other countries have been invaded. Most recently, Tanzania received a few swarms north of Mount Kilimanjaro. Eastern Uganda received some swarms that moved north into the country and crossed the border the past few days into South Sudan. Now, these 3 countries, they have not seen swarms since 1961. So this is a very, very rare phenomenon. Now, in addition to this, of course, the story is very complex with desert locusts. This is the hottest area at the moment, but there's 2 other hot spots that we're watching. One is along both sides of the Red Sea, in Sudan, Eritrea, Yemen, and Saudi Arabia, where new swarms are forming. And this third hotspot is the southern coast of Iran in Southwest Asia.
Right. If I could continue to ask a bit, Mr. Cressman, what about in this part of Asia? People suggest there could also be the danger due to the earlier factors mentioned in our background. Or what would you say, Mr. Cressman?
Well, first, just to clarify a few things about Asia. India and Pakistan, of course, they were invaded last summer at the beginning of the monsoon breeding period in about May, and that invasion occurred from Iran as swarms were produced there the previous spring. And then both countries, India and Pakistan, faced a very severe locust infestations throughout the summer until just last month. There's still a few remaining swarms in both countries along both sides of the border in the desert. Now, these are not a threat at the moment. The threat lies later this year, at the beginning again of the summer, so around May or June, when once again both countries, India and Pakistan, will be threatened from those spring-bred swarms in southern Iran. But this year it'll be a little bit different, because in addition to that threat, they will also be threatened by any swarms that continue to produce in the Horn of Africa, where in about May or June they will be carried by the southwest monsoon winds that cross the Indian Ocean, and they can easily move from northeastern Somalia to the border areas of India and Pakistan.
Yeah.
Now, historically, locusts in the late 40s and in the early 1950s, they moved across India towards Bangladesh. But they did not move further than Bangladesh because of the winds, and also because it's too humid. There's no desert areas. It's outside of really the desert locust range. So there's not a threat to China this summer or at any time, because the locusts simply cannot reach China.
I see. Ms. Wu, in the past decades of history, China had the time to fight against the locust invasion. And I still remember some of those old movies depicting scenes like that. Ms. Wu, how do you think the Chinese are looking at the locust invasion and thinking about, the root causes, if we have seen over the past 2 decades of natural disasters and public health crisis, one after another? Ms. Wu.
Sure. I think for Asia, particularly for China, so locust has been a very ancient sort of a past, impacting the food security, livelihoods over the decades, even centuries there. So over the decades or centuries, China definitely has accumulated a lot of experience in trying to make sure to grapple the situation or more in a preventive manner. So in this current sort of plague situation, as Keith mentioned, probably or less probability that they're going to come over to China. But China itself, we do have large desert areas. And now with the climate change happening and with extreme weather events, so there's a huge risk or uncertainty that's still existing in China today, whether locusts will come back to China and be, forming a plague that impacting the livelihoods and the food security. But today, of course, compared to before, China is in a much stronger position in terms of expertise, capability, and public policy. So I'm hoping somehow, with all the things happening around the Chinese government and Chinese society, will be really sort of, get together and more, emergency response sort of mood, make sure we prevent it and prevent it happening in China.
2 things, Mr. Cressman. One is, of course, to understand the root cause of locust plague like this. There are a lot of discussions about this, no definite answer yet. But on the other hand, is how should we address the issue right now? What can be done on those 2 fronts? Would you like to share some insights briefly?
Sure, of course. This current situation developed about 18 months ago in 2018 as a result of 2 cyclones from the Indian Ocean that brought heavy rains to the Arabian Peninsula. Historically, locust plagues have developed from cyclones in the past from the Indian Ocean. So this is extremely important events, and we're seeing now an increase in the frequency of cyclones in the Indian Ocean. So if this trend continues, of course, I think we can expect more outbreaks and upsurges of the desert locust in the Horn of Africa. Now, of course, this is the desert locust species. This is a different species than what the speaker was talking about in China. There it's the Asian migratory locust, and of course they have their own challenges and outbreaks there. But they're not related. It's like apples and oranges, in fact. There's no relationship. Now, in terms of the current outbreak and upsurge, what can be done? Of course, it's increasing and upscaling those aerial control operations that were mentioned earlier. And this is paramount. When there's such a magnitude of a problem that we're facing now, it's only aerial applications that can bring the situation under control with, of course, the help of the weather. So if the weather continues to favor the desert locust, and if these aerial applications, and if FAO's appeal is not quickly responded to, of course that would be the worst case scenario. And then in that situation, we could be facing a much larger plague by the end of 2020.
Right. Ms. Wu, before we go, I also have this last question for you as well. Now, natural disasters has no national boundaries, and when it comes to hunger as a result of natural disaster, it also has an impact all over the world when it comes to social and political, economic. So what do you say at this point as a scientist and as an advocate about the climate change when looking at things like this?
It's unfortunate climate change is already the new norm of the day, right? We have to live through it, and we have to bear the consequences like the plague of the locusts, like the novel coronavirus, and many others like extreme natural disasters there. Very important today, the global community has to come together. As we know very, very clearly, what's happening in East Africa today, there is a huge repercussion for global risk, right? Just imagine if people's livelihoods and food security, famine happens, and we're going to see more unrest, we're going to see more ecological refugees, and the global uncertainty, stability definitely is under threat. Yeah. So in that context, definitely for global challenges like this requires global solutions. Unfortunately, actually, today, if you look at the globalism and multilateralism, they are under tremendous threat and challenging the legitimacy. But fortunately, we still have the multilateral institutional infrastructure together, that UN and others together. So we still have the sort of infrastructure together so that we'll be able to pull solutions together quickly.
Thank you so much, Wu Changhua and Keith Cressman. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Really appreciate it. That's all the time we have for today. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching, and bye for now.